everybody. Hello. So I'll be filling in for Cody tonight. And last night he sent me what I'm supposed to be teaching, so it is whatever he didn't get to. So that's what he says. So we're going to kind of be talking about tonight, continuing his list. So on his list, some things that we talked about in the last few weeks, opinion matters of conscience, order of worship. We talked a little bit about that just briefly. And then mention Bible translations, dress and attire at worship, whether you need to wear a suit and tie or casual dress. We talked about that a little bit last week, that we need to make sure that we're modest. And then times of service, whether we had the midweek service or not. And then so tonight, I just thought I'd pick a few that we could discuss, and then kind of not even talk specifically about any of these, but just kind of this general category of things, and just our attitudes towards them, and how we maybe deal with some of those issues. And I mentioned last week at the end of class, I'll just tell you, just being, in my secular work, I'll have to remind myself all the time that it's my job to be a peacemaker. I will tell you, in the church setting, I have been very blessed at times. Sometimes it doesn't feel so blessed to have a leadership role a lot. I think I really, whenever I was asked to be a deacon, I really deliberated that because I felt like at the time, it tells you my age. I felt like I was too young until I realized the role of a deacon is to serve. I need to be young so that I can have energy to do what the elders asked me to do. And so the way that we structured that, though, at 28 years old, the way that we the congregation here structured that, the elders allowed the deacons to be very involved, not in the decision making, but getting to hear the decision-making process. We had elders and deacons meetings, and so when the elders met, the deacons were present to listen. And so I really appreciated that and gained an appreciation for how difficult some issues in the church can be, because we want to listen to all sides. We want everybody to feel valued, and we definitely want to make the correct, the scriptural, and the wise decision. And so some of these issues can become very difficult for leaders to work through, and I can tell you that firsthand. I mentioned last week also, as we went through a pretty long list of some things that throughout the church, not just this congregation, but throughout the church, that have been divisive issues. It was a long time into that class last week before we got to an issue that I don't remember this congregation having to deal with. And that very first one was Vacation Bible School. I don't remember this congregation ever having to deal with an issue, a disagreement about Vacation Bible School. Everything else on the list, yes, I have sat in closed doors and worked through those issues behind closed doors, and sometimes not behind closed doors. And so these are very real things. And one thing that I've learned is, and I have to remind myself of this all the time, or a lot, don't ever look at the other person, the person that you don't see eye to eye with them. Don't ever look at it as being silly. Don't ever look at it as being a trivial matter. That's how they feel. And so you have to work through that with them. And so that is extremely important. So some of these things, I look at them, and I honestly, one of the main ones we're going to talk about tonight, I didn't know it was ever an issue in the church. And then as it was on Cody's list, I started looking online, and apparently it has been an issue. I just had never heard of it before. But anyway, before we do that, though, I do want to remind us. Let's go to Romans chapter 14. And let's just read through that to kind of to set our thinking, our mindset, as we approach some of these subjects. And we may only get to a couple tonight, but as we approach some of these subjects, let's keep this in mind. Romans chapter 14. And so let's read the whole chapter. It's pretty long. Glad we have an hour tonight, and we probably won't even get through. But let's read the whole chapter. And so I can go ahead and start while my voice is holding out, and then I'll probably ask for some help later in class. But it says, Romans chapter 14, verse 1, "As for the one who is weak in the faith, welcome him, but not to quarrel over opinions. One person believes he may eat anything, while the weak person eats only vegetables." So what do we call that? Vegetarian, okay? You know any vegetarians? I know some. I like meat. I like meat. But some people don't like to eat meat. And in this case, it was most likely for a religious reason. They felt, in a religious way, they felt that they shouldn't eat meat. And so they ate only vegetables, some people. "Let not the one who eats the meat despise the one who abstains. And let not the one who abstains," the vegetarian, "pass judgment on the one who eats, for God has welcomed him. Who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? It is before his own master that he stands or falls, and he will be upheld, for the Lord is able to make him stand." So that was one of the first examples given here in Romans chapter 14. Vegetarian versus a meat eater like Trey and I. Okay? This should be their attitude toward one another. Not an important matter. It's not a life or death. Spiritually, it's not a life or death matter. Just get along. Respect one another. Because who do we both answer to? God. We're both God's servants, right? So it's addressed here in Romans 14. Verse 5, "One person esteems one day," so now we're on to a different example. "One person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. The one who observes the day observes it in honor of the Lord." And probably at this time, there was a lot of cultural influence, whatever culture that may have been, whether in this case Gentile, but Jews or Gentile, there was cultural influence on observing those days, just like there would be with us today in our culture. Verse 6 says, "The one who observes the day observes it in honor of the Lord. The one who eats in honor of the Lord, since he gives thanks to God, while the one who abstains in honor of the Lord and gives thanks to God. For no one of us lives to himself, and none of us dies to himself. For if we live to the Lord, and if we die to the Lord. So then, whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. For to this end Christ died and lived again, and he might be Lord of both the living and the dead." So again, another example. Some people esteem one day better than another. They observe that day. Some people say, "No, I'm not going to observe that day. Every day is alike." And here we're told it's not a life or death, spiritually, not a life or death issue. Respect one another. Respect the opinion of the other person. Verse 10, "Why do you pass judgment on your brother? Or you, why do you despise your brother? For we all stand before the judgment seat of God. For it is written, 'As I live, says the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall confess to God. So then each of us shall give account of himself to God. Therefore, let us not pass judgment on one another any longer, but rather decide never to put a stumbling block or hindrance in the way of a brother. I know and am persuaded in the Lord Jesus that nothing is unclean in itself, but it is unclean for anyone who thinks it is unclean. For if your brother is grieved by what you eat, you are no longer walking in love. But what you eat, do not destroy by what you eat, do not destroy the one for whom Christ died." In other words, your brother, right? So do not let what you regard as good be spoken of as evil. For the kingdom of God is not a matter of eating and drinking, but of righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Spirit. Whoever thus serves Christ is acceptable to God and approved by men. So then let us pursue what makes for peace and for mutual upbuilding. Do not, for the sake of food, destroy the work of God. Everything is indeed clean, but it is wrong for anyone to make another stumble by what he eats. It is good not to eat meat or drink wine or do anything that causes your brother to stumble. The faith that you have, keep between yourself and God. Blessed is the one who has no reason to pass judgment on himself for what he approves. But whoever has doubts is condemned if he eats, because the eating is not from faith. For whatever does not proceed from faith is sin. So in other words, going back to the eating example, if you think it's wrong to eat meat, like you really think it's sinful to eat meat, then you better not eat meat. Because if you do, if you think it's wrong to eat meat, but I'm going to go ahead and do it, that's sin. God didn't say you can't, but you're doing something that you think is wrong. You're willfully doing that. So to you, that's sin. I think this is something for us to really keep in mind. And Cody has pointed this out several times in this series in a roundabout way, one way or another. He's tried to get us to see, I think, that there are things that we cannot see eye to eye on. Eating vegetables, eating meat, for example. Observing one day, not observing the day. We cannot agree on that and still get along. Something that's not very common these days, right? If you don't agree, then you're on different teams and you're going to fight one another, right? That's not what God says. Yeah. He says in the church, brothers, there are some things that you can have different opinions about, and you're still brothers. You're still okay. You still build each other up. You still try to strengthen one another. And so I think as we have through this study, we need to continue to keep this in mind. Now, are there things that we really got to work out? We really got to find the truth about? Yeah, there's a lot of things, right? There's a lot of things that the Bible directly addresses, and we can't compromise on that. We have to keep working at our brothers. Say, hey, brother, look, it's right here. But there are some things in this life. There's a lot of things, honestly, in this life that as brothers we can disagree about and still be brothers, still worship in the same place every Sunday, still get along and not have issues with one another. So we need to keep that in mind as we continue this study. One of the things he gave me on his list is, Cody, if you're listening, I know you left some of these on purpose for me. But the next one that we're going to talk about is one that I did not realize was an issue in the church. My experience in the church, I grew up in the Church of Christ. Excuse me. Both of my grandparents, my dad's side, neither one of them grew up in the Church of Christ, but they both found the Church of Christ. And I don't really know the specific stories there on how they did that. But I grew up in Eric, and the Church of Christ, when I was young, was very strong in Eric. I mean, at one time they had around 200 members in their congregation, which is big for that little bitty town. And even when I was a young teenager, I remember the first time I led singing. This is how it happened. The preacher was my Bible class teacher, and we're walking out of Bible class, and he puts his arm around me, and it says, "You're leading singing this morning." And there was like 120 people there in the audience. And so, yeah, I was pretty nervous, but it was a pretty strong congregation. On my mother's side, my grandmother, her story is pretty admirable. She grew up Hispanic. She grew up in the Catholic Church, and she just knew. She had a Bible. She just knew that what she was reading didn't go with what she was practicing. And so what she did was she got that Bible, and she just started going to different churches every Sunday. And then she found one that looked like what she was reading about, and she started studying with people there, and I'm so thankful for those people. She started studying with people there, and then she ended up getting baptized, and she is a member of the church, and that's how she raised her children. And so when I came along, obviously, that's the only place I ever went. So went to church in Eric, which was a very strong church growing up, had elders and deacons, strong ministers that were well known in the area, especially for a small congregation like that. Sorry, the weather is really getting me today. Then from there, whenever I came to school at Southwestern, I had asked some preacher friends, where's the congregation that you would recommend worshiping? And they said Hydro. And so that's how Jessica and I ended up at Hydro. A preacher friend said, I know at the time Kendall Abner was a preacher here. He said, I know him. I know that's a very sound congregation. We came over here to check it out, and that was true. And so great people here. And the Abbotts and the Russells and the Longs and all of those just welcomed us, took us in. And so we worshiped here while I was going to college. Then we ended up, this is where I'm getting to. Then we ended up, I took my first job at Tipton. So you guys know Tipton. We immediately fell in love with the church and with the Tipton Children's Home. I was a high school teacher, and quite a few of my students were children. They lived at the Tipton Children's Home. So we might call them foster children. There was actually one who was a true orphan there. She was one of my students. And I'm so proud of those who were my students. They have gone on to do great things. And so I stayed there working. In fact, at the end of the first year that I was teaching there, they called me from Hydro. I did my student teaching in Hydro. And they said, hey, one of the teachers is leaving, one of the science teachers. And so if you would like the job, it's yours. Jessica and I talked about it. And the reason that we did not leave Tipton was because of the Tipton Children's Home. We developed relationships with those students, especially the high school students. A lot of those were going to be seniors the next year. And talking it through, we felt like those children had been abandoned their whole life. We could not abandon them. So we wanted to see them graduate. And so we went ahead and stayed another year. At the end of that second year, Hydro called me again and said, hey, there is another opening for a science teacher. And Justin and I talked about it like, okay, these kids are graduating, and this opportunity may not ever come around again. So that's when we came here and of worshiped here. So that's my experience in the church. And when we came back here, it was like 2002, maybe, something like that. 2002 or 2003. Yeah. Yeah.
You were kind of like right across the hall.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. I taught with Mrs. Moen. Yep. So, come to find out, working with the children's home, my granddad, so he spent weekends, he would drive to Tipton when he was younger and helped build some of the cottages there. So he would drive from Eric to Tipton, and he helped build some of the cottages that were at the Tipton's Children's Home. So we had that connection there. But I had never been around anything like that. But I saw the incredible work that was done, the influence that the Tipton Home and the church. The Tipton Home is overseen by the elders of the Tipton Church of Christ. The incredible impact that they had on the lives of those children who are every one of them was coming out of a difficult circumstance. And to show them the love of Christ and the way they did that, we were just amazed by the work that was done there. So the topic, the first topic that Cody gave me was the controversy over church-supported orphan homes. I didn't know that was a controversy, but apparently it is. And it's a real controversy. Again, keep in mind what we just read. If somebody has an issue with it, don't think it's silly. Don't look down on them. Talk about it. Work it out. If you just have difference of opinions, you have differing opinions. But I did find an article that kind of enlightened me on some of the issues, and it seemed to really be at its height in the 70s and early 80s. This controversy making its way into the church because I guess that there was a movement towards supporting not just orphan homes, but other institutions. And so I'm not going to read you all, 15 pages of this, but just to get the idea, I did highlight a few sections that I wanted to read so that we can this helped me to understand the issue a little bit better. But in this article, there's a section called What are the Issues? And so I'm going to read quote from some of this. It says, the matters which are dividing us are as follows. A difference regarding whether or not the church has an obligation to care for non-Christians. Okay? A difference regarding whether or not the church has an obligation to care for non-Christians. Some people call this and it's in quotes here, general benevolence question. The question boils down to this issue. Has God placed upon the local church the obligation to care for the poor and the indigents of the world? Is the church involved in the same kind of work as here he uses, Salvation Army? Behind this question is the more general question of how involved should the church be in social works. Those who are calling for the church to be establishing and maintaining orphan homes are also calling for churches, remember this is in 1980, they're also calling for churches to establish and maintain colleges, old folks' homes, medical missionaries, and clinics. In other words, church-supported hospitals, church-sponsored recreation, and other social works. At some point in time, the question must be raised. Is the church to be involved in social works of this nature? And so there is the question that was being posed in 1980, and I would imagine some today. The second part to that says, or following up that question, he says, if our liberal brethren are going to preach that the church should become involved in the support of such social programs, they should provide the Bible authority for the church to support poor non-Christians. In the absence of Bible authority for the church to help non-Christians, the practice of involving the church in general benevolence stands condemned. So that gets to the root of the question. In establishing these orphan homes, which Tipton Home was, and when it was established, it was an orphan's home. It housed and took care of children who had no parents. Either their parents had completely abandoned them. It was a different time. Parents had completely abandoned them. There's no DHS to come take care of them, to place them in a home. So they had to have someplace to live and somebody to feed them and house them. That's what the Tipton Home was. It was a place for true orphans to come. So it started as an orphan home. Now it is a children's home. So not so many orphans anymore, although remember there was one whenever I was there, but not so many true orphans anymore that don't have living parents, but more those that are placed there because there's no foster care available to take them. That's the way I act like it was yesterday. I'm getting older. That was 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago that I was there. Bree's been there since then, but. Yes. Yeah. After I moved back here, I found that out. Yes. And I think whenever I was there, it was kind of that question came up. Um, and sorry, chasing rabbits here, but if I remember the discussions, if they did, then they would have to abide by the government's rules. And one of the things there is the family. I mean, they're a family. The house parents, they take their children to church. They're involved in church. And if the government's involved, you can't force them to go. So anyway, so now it technically wouldn't be called an orphan's home, even though that's the way it started out. So hence new name. I think it was a Tipton orphan home to start with, and now it's the Tipton Children's Home. And then to conclude this article, the author says, again from 1980, either the liberals were wrong in introducing the church support of orphan homes, in which they loosed where God has bound, or we were wrong in opposing church support of orphan homes, in which case we bound where God has loosed. Again, that's where it gets difficult for leaders, church leaders. In either case, a full discussion of what divided us is going to be necessary before unity can be restored. Someone will have to repent of his sin before unity can be restored. Someone will have to ask God's forgiveness before unity can be restored. Yes, the issues of church support of orphan homes continues to divide us. Beneath the issue lies the crucial difference of attitudes toward Bible authority, and that is why the division continues until repentance occurs. I don't know of any churches that divided over this issue, but apparently there were. In 1980, I mean, I'll admit I was only 3, so don't remember any of that happening. But apparently it did, and maybe still does today. I don't know. But that was under the category Cody gave me was the general institution, and orphan homes was specifically listed as one of those institutions that has divided us, whether to support that as a church or not. I'll tell you, for me, the interesting question, and it was presented in here and some other things that I read, and in this class, I feel like I can pose things that I don't have the answer for. I feel like that's safe. Is the difference between the church supporting a benevolent program and an individual Christian supporting a benevolent program. That's kind of the avenue that some of them take to say that, of course, we are commanded that we are to take care of orphans and widows. Told that in was it James chapter 1? James chapter 1 verses 26 and 27 says, "If anyone thinks himself to be religious and yet does not bridle his tongue but deceives his own heart, this man's religion is worthless." Then verse 27 says, "Pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father is this, to visit orphans," and some versions say to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. So the command to take care of orphans specifically is given in the Bible. So the question posed by, at that time especially, by some different congregations was, okay, we're given that command, you can do that, Zane, individually. If you want to write a check and support, you can, but the church cannot. So, yeah, I honestly don't. I would like to talk to somebody that felt that way, because to me it seems like if Zane can do it, who makes up the church? us. To me, it seems like if we say Zane can do it, but the church can't, now we're kind of compartmentalizing. We can do things as individuals, but now as a church, we can't. I'm going to read you some things that blew my mind. I think I've already shared this to you, but I'll just keep sharing them. Here in a minute, I'll share this with you about a congregation in Tennessee, what they have done. But here's some other verses that go along with that. So these are from the Old Testament, but I think God surely looks at these the same way. We see that carried over in James chapter 1, 26 and 27. But Isaiah chapter 1, verses 16 and 17 says, "Wash and make yourself clean." So here, speaking to Israel, you need to get right. "Wash and make yourself clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight." This is the Lord speaking. "Stop doing wrong. Learn to do right. Seek justice. Defend the oppressed. Take up the cause of the fatherless. Plead the case of the widow." So it seems like as God's people, that's kind of our job, is to work for God on behalf of helping those who need help.
What scripture was that?
That was Isaiah chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. And then Psalm 82, starting in verse 1, 1 through 4, it says, "God takes his stand in his own congregation. He judges in the midst of rulers. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Vindicate the weak and fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and destitute. Rescue the weak and needy. Deliver them out of the hand of the wicked." And then Proverbs chapter 19, verse 7. One who is gracious to a man, let me back up. One who is gracious to a poor man lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his good deed. It's a pretty powerful verse. You're gracious to the poor man, somebody that's in need. You're lending to who? God, yeah. And he's going to repay you. It says he will repay him for his good deed. So, we're God's hands and feet. We help those who need help. Potential spam all day long. Anybody else have that problem? I didn't until just a few months ago. Now it's constant.
You have to say your name before it goes through.
Okay. Good idea.
Sorry, that just came
So, along those same lines, before we move on to a different topic, we might get there. We have long class, right? An hour.
You're good. Let it rip.
This is a church. I first heard about this. I was listening to the recordings from Affirming the Faith this year. We didn't get to go, and so we just started listening to all the lessons and got to hear them all that way. So, but didn't get to participate in the singing though. But one of them was about a church in Nashville, Tennessee, that actually has closed its doors, sadly. So that was the sad part. But it was established back in the 1920s, and so the names are in here. I'll get them all wrong. But anyway, there was a guy, Burton, what's his name? A.M. Burton. He was very blessed financially. He was, I believe, an insurance businessman and made a lot of money and built kind of an insurance empire. So he was very wealthy, and so he was very benevolent with his money. And one of the things he did was he bought a building in downtown Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville, Tennessee, in the 1920s, was a very rough place, especially downtown. And so for him to do that, to buy that building, really didn't make a lot of sense. Like there was surrounding, Nashville along the outskirts, really nice place. So he decided he's going to buy this building downtown. So he bought this building downtown, and the congregation just started flourishing. It was thriving in the midst of all this evil, honestly, just evil and sin. Getting to the end of the story, and then we'll back up. So, of course, that was 1920, so here we are 100 years later. Nashville has completely changed. I don't know if y'all have been there in a while. It's been 15 years ago last time I was there. And when I was there, we actually stayed downtown. And at that time, a lot of people in the 1920s lived downtown. It's kind of the way a lot of big cities are. Then everybody started moving away from downtown as far as living, and you just had businesses. So busy during the day, nobody lived there. Like that wasn't their neighborhood. So the congregation kept dwindling until there was only a handful of people there. They couldn't support themselves anymore, and they literally put chains on the door. The problem, though, was that whenever this man, A.M. Burton, whenever he deeded the property to the church, there was a clause that that property was theirs as long as they were acting evangelistically as the church. Well, if you put chains on your door, you aren't anymore. So, Amy Grant is the granddaughter of A.M. Burton. She stepped in and said, hey, this property belongs to my family. So she filed a lawsuit against the church, and that was went to court, and they finally settled. And actually, just last month, so this started in like 2018, just last month in April, they finally sold the property. Amy Grant's family got most of the profits, and the church members that were left got, I think, 20% of the profits. But of course, it was worth like $8 or $9 million because it was downtown in Nashville. But the reason I mention this is I want you to listen to what this congregation did. So, Central Church of Christ, Nashville, Tennessee, starts from scratch as far as the congregation goes. Guy buys the building. People, start coming. Very few. It said at the beginning of this somewhere. This is pretty long and very small type, but very few people were attending there, and then it started to grow a little bit. And here's some things I wanted to share with you. It's quite a bit, but incredible on what they did. And then we can have discussion, remembering Romans chapter 14, that no opinions are silly, no matter where you stand. But think of what they did. Started October, and I'm reading the transcript, so there may be incomplete sentences here, but it says, started October 1925, and it was known, Central Church of Christ in Nashville, it was known for its benevolent efforts. So they had medical and dental clinic in the building. They had a library. They had classes in hygiene and diet and exercise and music. They had pickup trucks where they delivered coal and groceries to people in the neighborhood. They had free meals every day of the week for decades. They had a job service program where they helped people get jobs, and they averaged over the first 20 years, which has been the focus of this person's study, of keeping 110 women and 60 men every night after that 20 years. And those were people who were homeless and probably just new to the city of Nashville and trying to get acquainted. So that was what they called the benevolent efforts. But equally, they had preaching and evangelism. And so they preached every day. They had a noon service every day, and Monday through Saturday, every day, Monday through Saturday, and 2 services on Sunday. And then radio became popular. WDKA in Pittsburgh started a radio in 1922. And so they went on radio in 1925, 26. And pretty soon, they had bought the radio station. They had an active visitation ministry. The wives of the elders and deacons organized it, and they visited every member in their home every year. They distributed literature 1 year and a half period, about 275,000 pieces of religious literature, including New Testaments and portions of that sort of thing. And they had missionaries that they supported around the world. So it was quite a congregation. And the bottom line that in that first 20 years, they baptized 8,000 people. 8,000 people. And so 20 years is just over 7,500 days, which meant they baptized more than one person a day for 20 years at the noon service. Almost always a baptism on Sunday for sure. Baptisms in the middle of the night. So they were extremely evangelistic, and so their benevolence and evangelism worked together. So for that reason alone, I mean, it's a remarkable congregation. But they had some theological perspectives that I thought were pretty unique. And they believed, again, this is transcript, sorry. They believed that when you showed love through benevolence, that it prompted people to come to Christ. And they helped the poor, the down and out, the vulnerable without any strings attached. There was no sense of being worthy or good enough or the right color or the right gender. And in everything they did, they verbalized the gospel. Every sack of groceries had a tract in it. And they would talk to people about the gospel. I was talking to one of the women who lived in the women's house, which was the old Cumberland Hotel. They had grown so much. They were housing so many people every night, teaching them the gospel. That was part of the deal. If you're going to be there, you're going to hear it being taught. So there were so many people, they had to buy the hotel. They just bought the hotel out across the street. It held about 110 women, and she said, "We were never told to go to church, but we understood that we should go." And so even in their housing program, people understood that this church was something special. And they always started with the basics of the Christian faith: love, joy, grace, and mercy. That was at the core. And strikingly, evangelism and benevolence weren't separate ministries. You know, we in most of our budgets, we list them separately. Shame, we do too. That's us. And and when we even have different people in charge of those. But they never did that. For them, it was hand in glove. It was just that they worked together. So, you know, for 1925, that's a pretty remarkable perspective. Sorry, I told you I had a lot to read out of this. It was pretty amazing to me what they did. It goes on to say, it does seem a time of high racial discrimination. So this is the 1920s in the South. That they took a different tact. But I don't know how far they went. The data I've looked at is just not complete, but their literature does say that they welcomed all people. One of the stories, it's like out of a movie, out of the Central Church of Christ, was the family from Texas, and they were in a touring car, which I understand is a car without a roof. And they were making their way to Nashville for work. It was an African-American family, and the car went off the road and turned over, and there was a crash, and a little boy was killed. And so people gathered around. I mean, it was a black family. It was 9 miles outside of Nashville. Everybody that gathered around was white, and no one knew what to do. I mean, you know what to do with this black family. What do you do with this black family that obviously needs help? They need to go to the hospital. So the crowd gathered. Police didn't know what to do. And then someone in the crowd said, "Call the Central Church of Christ." And so the police put in the call, and the people at Central who answered the phone were well trained. They were at the front lines of this, and they said, "Well, we'll take the injured to the hospital, and we will guarantee paying for the services." Does that sound familiar? Isn't there a parable about that? Taking a stranger, paying for services. The Good Samaritan. And asked the family if they would honor us by allowing us to help them with the funeral and burial of their child. Well, said, "We will have a way of a plot that we can let you have." So somebody there said that they could have a plot to bury their child. And so they took care of it. It was an African American family, and they took care of it. And after such deeds, people would start calling the Central Church a bit angry because they helped this black family. Why are you helping these people? Don't you know they're black? And the people, the secretaries, the receptionists, they were told that they had been trained, and they said, we believe that every person deserves to be treated with dignity. And let's have a little bit more. So the response here in this transcript, that's remarkable. He started a Highland Church, talking about this guy that started at 72 years old, and it was still there when he turned 96 and passed away. For him, it was real religion from the beginning to the end, and they did believe that if you practice sharing the gospel and helping people, that did produce remarkable results. And their story would be an example of that. And I think we tried to do that at a different congregation where he was at, called Highland, when I was there. And we had some remarkable results. They grew from 850 members to 1,500, while at the same time doing a school store that helped 119,000 children. So you know, they do fit together. Evangelism and benevolence. And then I think this is the last thing I want to read. Sorry, no, it's not. There's a little bit more. But to me, this is just incredible that they really helped so many people. It was a building that was focused on service. So you know they had a library, and so they had a place right next to the sidewalk where people could come in. They added 3 stories on top of the building to keep 60 men over a period of 20 years, men who had just come to Nashville to look for work. They went across the street to the convention center now, and they bought the Cumberland Hotel, renovated it, and turned it to a dormitory for women, averaging 110 women per night. They had a medical clinic in the building, a dental clinic. They had to have a place for that equipment. They had robust counseling ministries. They didn't call it counseling, they called it sharing. And they had to have a place where people could come in and have some privacy. And they had a playground for children, and so their building was meant to reflect what they were doing. And they didn't have any interest in making it look like a church because they were interested in being the church. And then the next part I'll just summarize. It's about how the community viewed them, and because the church was there and doing such great things. This last paragraph mentions just right outside the church building is where the prostitutes hang out. They had mud wrestling. There was gambling on the street, and the church never protested that. They never called the police. They never went to a council meeting about it. They showed love to those people. Some of those people changed their lives, started coming to church, and the others left because they couldn't stand being around the church anymore. So the community of Nashville was very thankful to the church for transforming downtown Nashville because of the work that they did. Those numbers and the work that they did, to me, just unimaginable, that translated into 8,000 people becoming Christians. Pretty amazing. So, how does that go along with what we were supposed to be talking about? So we can tell Cody that's what we were talking about. Supporting institutions, I guess you might say.
I think in recovery, I've seen a lot of like recovery places that are faith-based, or like and a lot of them have like the same thing kind of as the Tipton. That if you're in this recovery house, like Hope is Alive and things of that nature, that you must
Right.
It's the ones who, want it, I don't know, it's hard to explain.
So,
I've seen good things come from, the benevolence and the, what do you call it, evangelism, whenever you apply both of those together.
and I guess where the question comes in is, I mean, it's hard to argue with that. Like, oh no, you shouldn't help people. I mean, it's hard to make an argument for that. There's somebody that needs help. No, you shouldn't help them. So I guess the question comes in where the division came was, is that Trey's job or is the church's job? I guess is where they come from.
And since you put it like that, Trey and I and you are the church.
All right.
So if it's anybody's job, it's our job, because we are the church, so it's the church's job, because we are the church.
And that's kind of, my thoughts. Again, I told you I was going to share a lot of thoughts without honestly having time to have a conclusion on this to study. But all of you, if you see me, Jessica's right beside me. Okay, we work in the same place. Well, not at this time. She's in here. She's in the same place, right? There she is right there. So if you see me, she's going to be right there. If I'm at the school helping somebody, she's right there beside me. If I need to go to somebody's house, a lot of times, she's right there beside me. So these things would be okay for me to do, obviously. Both sides agree on that. Both sides of this argument agree on that. They're okay for me to do. In fact, I better be doing them, because if I'm not, remember what Jesus said? I was hungry, you gave me no food. I was thirsty, you gave me no drink. I mean, Jesus addresses this. We better be helping people who are in need. But what if Jessica's with me? Now we have two Christians together. I mean, we're part of the church. So now can we not do that? Because it's an individual obligation, not a collective obligation. How many people in the church can be involved? You said you, Trey, me. Is that too many? Does that mean it's the church doing that? So, yeah, I'm kind of with you, Zane. It's like we're supposed to do good things. We're supposed to help those who are in need.
Regardless if y'all do or not, I'm going to.
Yes,
You know,
yes,
y'all
yeah,
do what you want, but
right.
I'm going to do that. I'm going to help.
So then it gets down to, I know I'm not answering a whole lot of questions, it's bringing up a lot of questions, which I have learned in a study that Jessica and I started a couple of months ago, that actually was a Jewish thing. Like, they bring up questions without answering them, which I think is kind of silly. But anyway, I'm going to do it. So then it gets to the question of, it gets deeper in this as I looked at this issue. What about church finances? What can church finances be used for? And so for us, I'll just tell you, because we always try to be transparent. So for us currently, this is what we support. So we support the Creed Church of Christ, which is in Colorado. We give $100 a month. Most of the year, it's a very small congregation, and they struggle to support themselves. And so I think we have definitely an example of that. The brothers in Corinth that were helping the church, the Christians in Jerusalem. Definitely have an example. We need to be doing that when another church needs help. So we do that. But the others aren't necessarily churches. Joe Wells Mission Fund, we support that. VIA, it's kind of like the Tipton's home. He has a board that oversees his program, and it's the elders there at the Spring Meadows Church of Christ. And so we send the money to Spring Meadows Church of Christ, which is supporting his program. That's $500 a month. Then we support the Excel Still More program, which is $3,500 a year. And right now, currently, that's all that we're committed to. But in the past, we've sent money to the Bear Valley Institute to support students that are going there. And at times, we actually sent quite a bit at times when we were able to. But right now, kind of finances have kind of gotten a little bit tighter in the last, especially 2 years, and that's about when we quit supporting that program. So that's what we do support as a congregation. However, I do know Jessica and I support some church members outside of that, church programs outside of that on our own. So there's that avenue as well. All right, we have 5 minutes. I know for sure I did not cover that subject that well. Especially not knowing about it. That was my difficulty.
I've heard it argued that whenever we're commanded to take care of widows and orphans, that it's talking about widows and orphans in the church. And that's
I've heard
the
that.
argument that I've heard. Not that we shouldn't at all. It's that if they're not in the church, the congregation has no obligation to take care of them.
I've heard that argument too.
And it's hard for me to be okay with that, because how are you supposed to show those around you how much you care for them without showing them how much you care for them? And a lot of times, you can't just walk down the street and tell somebody to pray for them, or, show small acts of kindness. That's not going to catch somebody's eye in this world these days. But if, like, congregations that have, I use the Sunset School of Preaching, for example. They support AIM, the Adventures in Missions. I don't know if you know what that is.
I've heard of it.
But it's a lot of college-age kids. They send them out for 2 years. I have a lot of friends that have gone through, and they're basically missionaries for 2 years. Very, very good school. They convert a lot of people to the church all over the world. But it's because they go to these smaller towns in Tennessee or Colorado where they have a huge the poverty. The amount of people that are in poverty in those areas is pretty large. And they go and they'll have a Tuesday soup kitchen. And they convert 20 or 30 people in a month because they've brought somebody in for something else. Those people had a need that they needed fulfilled. They needed food that day. Well, they taught them the gospel while they're eating lunch with them. Next thing you know, they're attending the local congregation. It's just things like that. They would have never come in contact with those people if they didn't have that. They did not put that opportunity in front of them. They would have never known to convert those people if they were just talking to them on the street.
These 8,000 at Central.
8,000, they never would have stepped foot in that building
No.
if they weren't doing something else for them.
Yeah, most of them were like the people you're describing.
Christ did the same thing
Yeah.
with the 5 loaves and 2 fish. Those 5,000 men, who knows how many women and children, probably never would have sat down with him and listened to a sermon if he did not provide a reason for them to sit down. And then when he had their attention, use the opportunity.
But actually, they were already following him and meeting there before.
Yeah, they were there. I believe at that time they were there because they'd heard about all the miracles.
All American.
They heard about the miracle,
Yeah.
but they weren't there necessarily for teaching.
No. They wanted to see, oh, is this real? Yeah. Yeah. Yes. I have really tried. Zane does a good job of this. I've really tried in the last couple of years to do a better job, and I think I have improved. So I'm still trying. But anytime somebody says thank you for something that I do for them, or gives me a compliment for something that I've done, try to redirect that to God. We'll give God the glory for it, not me, God. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about. It's directing people to Jesus. That's what it's about, and showing them how much you care, doing what Jesus would do, helping them. That gets them directed to Jesus. And so, anytime somebody says, well, thank you for doing that, I'm like, oh no, that's not me. I wouldn't do that on my own. That's because of Jesus. Jesus has taught me to do that. That's what I know Jesus wants me to do. And so It gives you an opportunity to talk about Jesus. And to help people. I mean, they're all God's children. I'll chase a big rabbit here. So in that study that Jessica and I have been doing, both of us have always wrestled with this idea. So this is complete rabbit hole while we're waiting on the kids. So in the Old Testament, and it even carries over to the New Testament, we see it, but with Moses and Pharaoh, and then we see several times that it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart. I've always thought, why would God do that? Like, why would he harden somebody's heart? But the study that we're doing points out that God wants everybody. God wanted Pharaoh. And so the language that's used is the same language that's used about Joshua. But there it talks about Joshua's heart being strengthened, but it's the same language. So God was strengthening Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh decided what to do with that strength. He could have decided what God wanted him to decide, and that was chase after God with that strengthened heart, but he didn't. So that kind of reconciled it in my mind for me, because I'm always like, why would God harden anybody's heart? Well, he strengthened his heart. So he set him up for, you make a good choice and you're mine. But Pharaoh made the other choice. So my point there is God wants everybody, and we could be the avenue to lead somebody to him that he wants. I'm not sure that I taught according to the series that we've been studying, but good discussion, good comments. Appreciate y'all, and kids should be in here pretty soon. Thank you, Jeremy. Yep, thank you.